Good morning, church. This is the second session of historical background and the world of the Old Testament. Understanding the historic world, as in the last session we talked about Tanakh, right? Ta means Torah, Na means Naveen, the prophets, and K means Ketuvim, which means prophets, and also the other writing which is called as historical writings. And today, specifically, we're going to read what all the writings are about. In Psalms chapter 78, verse 4, the word says here is that we will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He has done. Always, from the time of Moses, we can see that there was a habit of Israel or Jewish context. They had an habit of writing everything. God have told them to write everything very carefully, right? Even God is a greater example of writing. He wrote with his finger the 10 commandments, right? God is more focused on writing. I would like to challenge you, as you are a biblical student right now. Are you writing something in your life about God? Are you writing something after you meditated the word? Are you writing something when you hear a sermon? Are you writing something when you hear a Bible study? I would like to challenge you that writing comes from the Lord. And we can see the entire Bible is being a focus of writing. And today, we're going to ask ourselves a question. If the Bible is God's word, why does it contain so much of history, right? Many of us, we won't go into many histories of the Bible because we feel it like it is a huge story. Who can hear all this story? Who can read all this story? But we see that knowing the history means not just reading, it is knowing the roots of where we are from, right? More reading about the people in the Old Testament, you will know about God and His actions over His people from the Old Testament. Many times we just see people, we just see the character. Even today I was discussing with my friend about the book of Jonah. When you read the book of Jonah, it doesn't matter who Jonah is, because he doesn't want to go into the Nineveh. He doesn't want to do God's work. He doesn't love the people of Nineveh. He just wanted to go away from ministry. He just not liking to be part of this calling and all. Even though he is an anointed prophet, with his one sermon he could turn the Nineveh city, but still he was going apart from what God wants him to do. But you see Jesus, or you see God, they are very clear on whom they choose, whom they call. And we can see that the Old Testament, the entire Old Testament, we can see the effects of what God's love can do to people, what God's attributions are doing to people. And very quickly, we're going to discuss about many things that are happening in the system of the Old Testament. When you have to know about the Old Testament, we may have to deal about the regions which is being mentioned in the Bible. For example, Mesopotamia is a place where Abraham lived, right? Abraham and his ancestors and his entire civilization lived. And another place is called Egypt, where Israel was in slavery. Israel was needed a deliverance. Many times we can relate these places to a place of being in the lifehood. Maybe being in Egypt right now, it can mean that we are in bondage, right? Egypt can resemble bondage, and God's deliverance can happen as a blessing over Egypt. And we can read about Canaan. Canaan is called as a promised land, where God took people from Egypt. He wanted them to travel to Canaan. So Canaan is one of the places where we can see in the Bible. So all of these regions can be a greater need of knowing when you read about the Old Testament. And there are some other powerful empires also related to it. When you come across Egypt, you read about pharaohs, right? And you read about the wealth and the military capacity that the pharaoh had, and how he can come after Israelites. And we can see that how God is fighting with Pharaoh and his system. Okay, he sends 10 plagues to that place in order to bring people from the Egypt in the deliverance way. And we can see that there is another city called as Assyria. It is a different empire. We can see that they are a people, those who are completely filled up with sins. And we can see that they are the people who goes and attacks Nineveh. And we can see that is what happening in the Old Testament as the priority of the time. People goes down with the sin. And we can see that Babylon is another place where we see Daniel and his friends taken into captive. And a king called Nebuchadnezzar, he comes and destroys Solomon's temple. And he takes up people from there. And from there, we can see that lot of prophet fulfilling happening right there. And we can see that Persia is a place where people were sent from the slavery again. It is something like from Egypt, Moses brought them out. We can see here from Daniel's time, from Babylon, Persian rule delivered them to come to the promised land again. And we can see that all these things takes up time for us to understand, but I would love to tell you about this region that you can have it in your mind when you come across the Old Testament. So these are the geographical region, and also the Asian Near East culture we have to understand, because reading the Bible, it doesn't only about reading just like that. We also need to understand the culture at the time and the regions that are focused in that time, so that we can directly link to it of what is happening at that time, at that place. And we can see that there is an historical period. Okay, so when you have a paper and pen, kindly note it down what we are reading from the Old Testament as a whole together. The first thing that we read is about the patriarchal period. We call this patriarchs as people, those who are living in the time of Genesis. Okay, so we can see that always in the Bible there is a mention of a patriarch. It is said that he is a God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And also of the Joseph, right? So these people are called as patriarchs. So when you wanted to remember Genesis, all that you remember is Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, right? Okay, so you can see that we all come across Adam and Eve, and then comes in the 6th chapter we read about Noah, right? God wipes out entire world and he regenerated people in the time of Noah, right? And then come across Abraham. And when you simply have to remember Genesis, all that you have to remember is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And also we know that this leadership is completely focused on shepherdship. Okay, so Abraham was a shepherd. We can see we can see Isaac was a shepherd, and also Jacob was a shepherd, right? So it shows that how God has predestined these patriarchs as shepherds. In the time of Jesus' birth, the gospel went first to the shepherds, right? So we can see that Jesus himself was like a shepherd leading sheep, right? As we today, our church can be called as a pasture, like for example, like how David is portraying it. God is leading as people as like sheep lead that by the shepherds. It's a wonderful example that we could come up with the patriarchs. This happens in the time of 2000 to 1500 BC. And what happened next is Exodus and deliverance. Okay, so the next books that represents is all about Exodus and the deliverance. This happens after the time of Genesis, right? During the time of Exodus, we read that people were in the Egypt, and there was Moses who brings them back from the Egypt. And Moses brings them back to the Mount Zion, where God Himself is coming there and giving them the commandments, and He also gives them the tabernacles idea, how they can relate themselves to God again. And we can see that this is what happening in the books of the Moses. We can read about how Moses is bringing people and how God set up His system. You all read about the offerings, right? There were 5 types of offerings that has been done in the time of Moses. We will learn it into a deeper way in the next session. But understand this one thing, that God has an heart of bringing up people into this covenant. This is where the old covenant begins, right? He needs people to come under His covenant, His love covenant. That is the main focus of Moses and the wilderness that has been happening there. It is very easy that the people from Egypt could go to Canaan, but because of their disobedience, they wanted to travel around 40 years as a journey of wilderness. We can see from the Bible, right? You can see that people were walking in the wilderness. They won't feel pleasant, right? They won't feel that they are so much happy over there. They were cursing things. They were talking against God. Even with their disobedience, they were doing some rebellious things against Moses himself. They were angry about God, and we can see that with all these things are happening, God was very faithful to bring them to the promised land. Even if Moses couldn't go, it was the covenant that brought them to the promised land. And we could continually read about the judges. From there, we could read about Joshua, who comes after Moses. It is Joshua. And from Joshua, there are judges. Okay, so we can see that Samuel is the last judge of the judges. And from there we can see that Samuel is a person who goes and anoints David, right? So from Samuel we see David as a king, and we see Saul as a king, and also we see Solomon as another king. Okay, so from Samuel he goes and anoints Saul, and he goes and anoints David, and also he anoints Solomon as the emperors of the Israelic covenant. And we can see that the monarchy is divided from the time of Solomon. After the time of Solomon, because of the character or the administration of the Solomon, the kingdom is divided into 2 different parts, and we can call 10 tribes as Israel and another 2 tribes as Judah. And we can see that after Solomon, after we have a greater destruction of the temple, the entire people, the entire scenario has changed into a divided kingdom. And we call it as northern kingdom as Israel and the southern kingdom as Judah, where the temple of God was there. And we can see that after that Babylonian captivity of Nebuchadnezzar taking the people to Babylon, and we can see that is the time where God uses Daniel, and in the time of Zerubbabel, the people were coming from the exile, they are coming back to the promised land again. So this is what happens in the Old Testament. The first thing that I told you is the patriarchal order, which focus on the priestly system, shepherds, and then comes Moses, and you can still see the priests, okay, God calls them Levites, right? It is all priestly roles that we could see in the time of Moses. And then comes the time of kingship, where Samuel goes and anoints kings. He anoints David, he anoints Saul, he also anoints Solomon, and we can see that there is a kingship that is running on. When you read the books of Samuel, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, you read a whole thing about kings, right? And then comes the prophets, okay? Prophets consist of, as I told you before, major prophets and minor prophets. So always remember this thing in 3 things. The first thing is priesthood, the second thing is kingship, and the third thing is prophethood. Okay, so the first thing is priesthood, where you read about Abraham to Moses, and then kings, you read Samuel, David till Solomon, and you read about prophets, where you come across prophets in the Old Testament times. We're going to conclude with what we could learn as a church over this Old Testament today. We can see that God is working in real history, right? He does not see these people as an individual people. Through Abraham, he sees Jesus. Through Jesus, he sees his disciples and the time of restoration as a church till this date. We can see that Jesus or God doesn't see these things or people as just the people, those who are myth. And we also shouldn't think like these people are just stories. The stories that we read from the Old Testament is no longer involved in our life. No, it is closely related to what we are going through in our life. When you closely read, you can understand the lives are resemblance of God's power. We can see that God's entire possession is there in that particular way. Where our faith is grounded in the Old Testament, it is not just more than stories or myths that we come across. And we can read that the historic awareness strengthens our lifestyle living for God. We can see that the exile makes them strong. It is not that God allows the exile. You see, God allows them to be in Egypt. God allows them to be going as a captives in the time of Daniel through Nebuchadnezzar. They were in captivity of Babylon. This all things are God allowed, but you also remind that those are the places where help them reformed, right? We see that it is not just stories that we come across over Old Testament. In Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11, God is promising them that I'm going to give you a better future. It is not that God is telling us today, as we are living in a small world, in a small way, where we see that God is going to make me better. It is not just like that. You see, the entire system is collapsed. You see, the church is distracted. Their walls are distracted. During the time of David, Israel was a top nation that nobody could ever defeat Israel. Nobody could ever enter Israel. You see, there are plenty of gates around. There is plenty of protection around. In the time of Solomon, Israel was the richest country. And you see, because of the sin, the entire nation collapsed. The temple collapsed. The walls collapsed. The life collapsed. When the Nebuchadnezzar came, he destroyed everything of what we call it is from the Israel. He completely destroyed Judah and he captured everything. And God is promising them that I will going to make your life better. It is not just a line. It is not just a word. It is a promise. It is a covenant. And that is what we can relate it with when we read thoroughly or closely about the Old Testament happenings there. Because God, as a God, wanted to rescue them from many things. You see, continuous idolatry. They were continuously falling for other gods. They were continually falling for sins. And you can see that there is political instability. People were just not taking care of the leadership of God. They don't want David. They don't want Solomon. They don't want Samuel. They don't want prophets. We can see that the political system itself is collapsed. And God needs to not only work in the life of individuals, He also works through the political scenario. He wants us to believe that He also a God who involves in political interactions. And we can see that not only today, during that time, the people were persecuted, right? There was a there was a collision in the church. There was a collision in the system. There was sin involved in God's people, God's leaders. We can see that all these things that are happening within the community, that we can even relate it to our new and lives that we live here in 2025. And the mission and the motto here is God keeps up His covenant. God keeps up His relationship. God keeps up his faithfulness, and he will continue to give, continue to guide, and continue to motivate into the mission of what he has called us for. And these are the sessions that we come across in this session 2, and we will learn more things in the future. God bless you. Have a great day.